And first of all, I'd like to go to something very specific in the bill. And this relates to a provision in the bill that says that you would have to purchase more than the value of €175 if you were a tourist here from a non-EU country to get the VAT rebate. Now, this has been an incredibly important scheme, particularly to craft shops and other businesses right around the country. But I have to say, particularly in those areas of the country where a high part or proportion of the economy is based on tourism, there are a lot of jobs involved. And all of the craft shop owners will tell you that most of the purchases, there might be multiple purchases in one shop, they might spend quite a bit of money, but the individual purchases would not come to €175. Now, I do recognise, like everybody else, that the island of Britain joining its neighbouring island, the Isle of Man, outside the European Union, is going to, because of their sheer population, is going to change the world quite dramatically. But I understand that there are good safeguards in the bill already to ensure that this process is not abused from people from our neighbouring island, and that the provision, even though technically speaking the north of Ireland is going to be outside the European Union, in lots of other ways it's going to be in it, and in this case that it's going to be considered to be in the European Union, and therefore you will not be able to come in from the north of Ireland, buy your goods, claim the VAT and go out. And I hope, Minister, that we get good news on this before this bill goes through the Dáil, and that we see a more tourist-friendly approach to it. And I think we also have to recognise that all the goods bought under this scheme are brought into the country or made in the country, and we'd much prefer that a lot more of them were made in the country and produced in the country. And I think we have to look at trying to make sure that more and more of our tourist product is actually produced within the island of Ireland. I think that when we look at it in the round, we're going over the top here to achieve something that might not happen in the way I think people would fear. Because the only people who would be able from Britain would be people who came in here and they'd have to leave the island again. As I said, there's no shortcut through Northern Ireland on this scheme. It's amazing to me watching the television these days, because when Brexit wasn't happening, day and night, all we got on the television was Brexit. When we were really very far away, as was shown subsequently from the line, if you looked at RTE News now, there was a whole section devoted to Brexit issues. And now we're coming up to the real wall. It doesn't seem to be worrying, certainly the media, as much as one would have thought. And I have to say that I hope that an agreement will be reached. It's going to take flexibility and goodwill on all sides. I think it is a pity that Europe didn't recognise earlier that whether Europe agreed with it or not, or whether we liked it in this island or not, the British people had had a referendum and they had made their choice. And that we should have all respected that from the beginning, but it seemed that a lot of people spent a lot of time trying to tell them that they made the wrong decision and that it was all a big mistake and they were badly informed or whatever. And last Christmas, whether we like it or not, they reaffirmed that decision by putting the Conservatives very strongly back into government on get Brexit done ticket. I think we have lost time when we could have been working out the modalities of this, trying to persuade them that they made a big mistake. And as I said, I think we should have recognised their sovereignty in this issue on the island of Britain. Now, I do recognise, of course, that because of the events that happened 100 years ago that came back to haunt us, it's having a very, very unforeseen difficulty on this island. And the way I summed up that difficulty from the beginning was that you couldn't accept a border on the island, but you could accept the sensitivity of the unionist, pro-Brexit population, who are in the minority as it happened, but a large minority, that putting a border in the Irish Sea would send wrong political signals to them. Again, it's water under the bridge now. But it took a long time to sort that one. Peculiarly enough, maybe by accident more than design, if we do get a hard Brexit, Northern Ireland, in my view, is going to find itself in a very advantageous situation, actually in a better situation than the South, because they're going to be the only sterling area in the single market. And on the other hand, all the widgets that they produce in Northern Ireland, if I understand rightly, they might have to go through paperwork, but can be sold through the South into the whole of Europe without any customs or tariffs, and no paperwork going that way. And if they go into the island of Britain, they still also can sell in there. So they're going to be the only part of the European Union that can sell both to Britain and to the rest of Europe with no tariffs. And of course, we could find, particularly around the border areas, a migration of companies setting up in Northern Ireland because of that advantage. All the more reason that it's important for this island that actually we do get an agreement. Now, I'd like to say a few words about fishing. I've always maintained that fishing was going to be a very contentious issue. I looked at British politics and I said to myself, things like fishing are very, very symbolic of sovereignty. But one other conundrum that I haven't heard debated so much is, where are the waters, the richest waters around the island of Britain? In England, it's on the northeast coast, not on the west coast of England, because they have a clear run for 200 miles towards Norway. And it's interesting to note that those were constituencies that the Conservative Party did well in. Not that that many of them are fishermen in those areas, but it's symbolically important to them. But much more importantly is north of them. Scotland is surrounded on three sides, and more than three sides, by water. And furthermore, the water extends well out and well north, because you've got the Shetlands and the Orkneys to the north of Scotland, and you've got the Isles to the west, well west of Scotland. So they have enormous wealth in Scotland on the fisheries. And we know that inevitably there will be a new referendum. And we know the last referendum was won by the pro-union side by 5%. Now, if you wanted to maintain your margin and your Boris Johnson, you will want to be able to say to Nicola Sturgeon, look, go with independence, you go back into the European Union and you give all the fisheries back again. Stay with me and I'll defend all your fisheries. We'll hold them for Britain. And for that reason, I believe Britain will hang tough, and I always have believed, on the fisheries issue. Maybe I'm wrong. And therefore, I think no matter what comes out of these negotiations, I think that it could have very, very serious consequences for Irish fishery. But never one to look at things as being half empty. I'd rather look at them half full. I think it's time that we said in Europe that the whole fishery regime stinks. We sold ourselves short. There was a Fianna Fáil government, I hate to say, from the very beginning in Europe in relation to our water resources, our fish resources. We have 14% of the fish and 4% of the quota. Furthermore, we've allowed people up very near the coast. 6 miles is the sovereign amount that we control. My belief is that the coastal communities where most of the fishermen work in coastal fishing, 80% of the fishermen, 90% of the fish is caught by the big operators, the big industrial operators, but 80% of the fishermen are in small boats. And therefore I think there is a case to be made at European level that all of the coastal nations would get a much bigger slice of the coastal waters for their coastal fishermen, and that the big industrial interests would have to yield way to a much more localised interest that benefit the local economy. There are many other things I could say about this issue. As I said, though, in the beginning, there's a few weeks there. An arbitrary deadline should not be set. We should keep talking and talking till we get to a place of agreement. I would finally have to express a view that it does seriously worry me in the final hot hours of these negotiations that we're not going to be at the table. And it's very hard to expect anybody to represent your interests as you could. When the big industrial interests of France and Germany are at stake, I'd be a little bit afraid, I have to say, that we might be let down. I've always had that fear. And all I could think of when I listened to previous speakers, we've had a history in this country of always believing that our salvation would come from abroad. And any time that anybody talks in those terms that we're going to be saved by Europe or America or by somebody else, I always think of the song from way back when, Tá na Franca teachtar sáilir san tean van bocht. And I think of people who then decided that the destiny of Ireland should be taken into the hands of the people of Ireland. Not that they wouldn't be internationalist, not that they wouldn't play their part as one of the nations of the world, but they would do so in a sovereign way and make sure they were at the table. I accept I'm probably in a minority of 1, 2, very small numbers that believe that, but I have that deep worry and I hope sincerely I'm wrong.